Hey everyone, it's CL Walker here, natural corrective foot and ankle specialist, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Emily Splichal, and she is a podiatrist from New York City who has created some really interesting Insoles and other technology that she's going to explain to all of us, including myself, and I have some specific questions. But it's designed to help with balance, motion, and getting people out of pain. So I'm going to let her kind of take it from there. Dr. Emily, thank you for being here. And tell me about Naboso. Naboso is her company, by the way. And so tell me how you came up with it and how it developed. What was the story here?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me on. Hello to everyone. My name is Dr. Splichal, and I started Naboso, Naboso is the name of the company, Naboso Technology 2 years ago as a way to help individuals access the nerves in the bottom of the feet. Now, part of my initial exploration is that I am a movement specialist as well, and very much fascinated in barefoot science and how we can optimize human movement from the ground up, specifically from a sensory perspective. My passion is within sensory science or neuroscience, where some people love biomechanics. I'm kind of on the side of I love sensory. And then that
it was like a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll.
Exactly. So I started reading a lot of research around texture, specifically as a sensory stimulation, and how powerful it is to posture and balance. If we have neuropathy or a neurological condition, what it's doing to these movement patterns. And then there was also some really cool research around performance, like dancers and football players and soccer players, and what it was doing to their ankle stabilization. So seeing all of that research, having an appreciation and a passion for it, and then seeing that nothing was on the market that used that research and could help patients or individuals, athletes, etc., with that science or with that research. So then I saw the opportunity to develop a product, which is now Naboso, using that research or being inspired off of that research. And that is now what we have today. I will show you the insole. So if you can see kind of zoomed in, if I can catch
it.
Right?
I do see it.
Yep, that there's these.
Looks like a tiny little waffle iron.
Yeah, exactly. So there's
little foot-shaped waffles.
Very thin, yeah. So it's a very thin, freely movable insole. So it's purely sensory. All that it's doing is stimulating, not all, but really what it's doing is stimulating the nerves in the bottom of the feet. We intentionally design it thin and freely movable so that you could apply it to a custom orthotic. You could put it on any arch support that you have. You could put it in any shoe. It can accommodate to any foot type. We have people who use AFOs in different braces, and it could be used in that as well. And what we see is that when you stimulate the nerves in the bottom of the feet with texture that is specific. So we call our texture 2-point discrimination, which means like Braille. So if you think of Braille dots, the Braille is 2 points, and you're essentially differentiating or reading the 2 points. Same thing, same nerve that we're stimulating in the feet. When you stimulate that, your brain then connects to your feet. That means, where am I in space? I feel the ground. I can connect to my foundation. I feel balanced. I feel stable. I feel confident. That's what we're going after, and that's the results that we're seeing with our insoles in many different medical conditions and with many different athletes' performances, running, etc.
So I have a question. Does Naboso, so going back to the 2-point technology, could you talk a little bit about the 2-point discrimination, and did you come about this because of Braille, and how did Braille come about, and maybe just a little bit in a layperson's term about that idea, and what specific muscles does it stimulate? So I am big on core muscle stimulation. And again, we have core muscles at any joint. And one of the things that I talk about biomechanically is that, about alignment, dictating function, frequency, and flow. And the idea of how to stimulate those core muscles of the feet, which I think is something that happens with your insoles.
Yes. And I love that that's how you word it and phrase it, and totally love it. So yes, stimulating the nerves through 2-point discrimination. Now I didn't think of Braille and then come up with Naboso. I was looking at past research that actually looked at, well, what if the shape was pyramid, or what if the texture was round, and how tall is the texture and how far apart is the texture? All of those things get factored in. That was part of our research, like the R&D side of it, is what shape. Our shape happens to be a triangle. So the triangle, finite point of the triangle, and then the distance between each of those triangles is very specific. That's based off of the nerves and where they are in the feet. And then the height of it is very specific. So the shape, height, and distance of our texture, very specific. And then it just happens to match that of Braille, as far as the distance of the Braille and the height of the Braille and things like that, is kind of an after the effect, where I was like, oh, like that's a very good example that a consumer or a patient can understand, because everyone knows what Braille looks like. We might not stop to actually look at it, but we're essentially stimulating the same thing. Now, when you stimulate the nerves in the feet from a muscular perspective, the core muscles of the foot are then the intrinsic muscles, or the muscles in the bottom of the feet. So all of those muscles in the bottom of the feet are very important to foot posture, which I don't know if you reference it as like foot posture, but foot posture and the ability to center the foot and have a strong foundation foot mechanically requires the muscles in the bottom of the foot to engage. And the way that we do it is through stimulating the skin or the nerves, where it's sensory information that leads to muscle contraction. You drive motor movement and muscle contraction through sensory input. Not to make it too complicated, but there's like information in, motor out, like sensory in, motor out, afferent, efferent, up and down, positive, negative, like all that stuff. It's kind of like a yin and yang, right? We could even go to that there has to be kind of like a stimulus and then an effect. Stimulus, the effect is the muscle contraction. The muscle contraction then leads to centered, strong foot or foundation.
Right.
What we're trying to do.
And, and to that point, with regard to these muscles that we're talking about, the stabilizing muscles, the core muscles, guys, these muscles are not designed to move. They're designed, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they are designed to stabilize so that the moving muscles can do their job. And I learned this lesson very powerfully. I tell this story all the time. When I was in college, we were talking about the rotator cuff. And when we're talking about intrinsic muscles of the foot, it's like the rotator cuff of the foot, okay? So that these muscles, again, their job is not to move the foot per se, but to go ahead and stabilize the joint so that the muscles of the foot can do their job. And what winds up happening is that if those muscles aren't working properly, not only do they contribute to the form of the foot, but then the moving muscles are not going to be able to do their job as well. And an interesting thing that came up in my study, in my research, is that for every cubic centimeter of inflammation, a muscle shuts down by 1%. And the muscles that are closest to the joint happen to be these core intrinsic muscles. So if you have an injury, guys, what winds up happening is that the core muscles, and this is true for a rotator cuff, it's classic, is that the core muscles are no longer able to do their job, and then the moving muscles are taking over, and there's no protection of the joint. So diagnoses like hallux rigidus or, bunions or any itis and any itis that goes on is going to affect these core muscles. And there are very few ways, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate your technology so much, is that there are very few ways to stimulate these core muscles to fire, especially when we're working against an inflammatory process, and the fact that we have to use our feet most of the time, unless, we're put in a boot and immobilized, which is one of the reasons why medical professionals go ahead and do that, because we have to stop that inflammatory process or inject with cortisone. Here's another one, or take an over-the-counter anti-inflammatory. But what's nice is that this is, reinforcement with every step that you're taking. And if you're taking 10,000 steps a day, holy cannoli, that is, you're getting this stimulation to these intrinsic protective muscles of the feet that are really important with regard to balance and joint health. So,
yes. So I mean, that's totally, you're saying exactly what I would say, but I use, you use the analogy of the rotator cuff.
Mm-hmm.
I use the analogy of the pelvic floor, like the deep muscles, which same thing, right? Yeah. And then how you say that the smaller muscles, they stabilize. I call them local muscles and global muscles, which are stabilizers and mobilizers, same thing.
Yeah.
And I agree with you 100% that that's part of what we do. And that is the goal, and partly of why we designed it is, those muscles do stabilize. It's hard to get them to contract when you are in an inflammatory state, when you're in a pain state, which technically inflammation equates pain, or an acidic state, or kind of whichever word people like, that how can we bring stimulation to the muscles that we need to get firing again without overloading the system to then create potential further pain cycling or breakdown. Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. And I really like that that's synergistic with how I would say it and what we do at Naboso.
And, here's another thing going into your background with Barefoot Technology. One of the things that I explain to people when they're having foot dysfunction, or they have, flat feet, or they're presenting with some kind of malalignment of the foot. And the way that I explain it is that, again, we are still animals. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we were not really meant to wear shoes. And we weren't really meant to walk on paved surfaces. Our bodies really were meant to go on uneven terrain. And I almost wonder if, what your insert is doing and your technology is doing is kind of mimicking that type of stimulation that we would ordinarily get if we were in a position where we would be, hunting for food up hills on rocks and uneven terrain with minimalist shoes and no support. And so I wanted to get into some of the patient populations specifically that this would be helpful for. And again, obviously, any kind of neurological neuropathy, we were just off camera talking about toe walking, which I believe, again, kids will toe walk because they're trying to get stimulation into their foot. And the way that they do that, most of the sensory receptors are in the big toe, are they not?
Yes, it's in the forefoot and the hallux, yes.
Right. And so what they do is they go ahead to try to get more stimulation into that area by going ahead and toe walking. Or another thing that I have come up with clinically is that the human body will do anything to get the big toe on the ground. And when we are in utero, we're in a position called supination, which is where our toes are kind of turned inward and pointed. And then when we start crawling, we're in supination because we're crawling and that's the position of the foot. And then all of a sudden we go into walk and, standing. And from a structural standpoint, there could be some issues there that are, again, causing people to develop feet that are not well aligned. And because we don't have the stimulation of the ground and uneven terrain for these intrinsic core muscles to develop, that's why people, and also I should say from my biomechanical standpoint, mobilization, right? Because that's going to be important also. And if we were hiking on rocks or climbing trees or doing those kinds of things, we would get a natural mobilization from the ground. But in society, we don't have all of these things today. And in addition, we have shoes that, and the research that I've been reading about orthotics is that we're actually causing the intrinsic muscles to kind of atrophy.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the research around atrophy of the intrinsics, core muscles, right? The foundation, technically the muscles that should be firing before or engaging before the larger mobilizers. You get an atrophy of that when you do use orthotics. So what I try to do in my practice and with my patients is, how can we bring the optimal foot function that you described, hiking and walking in the wilderness on uneven terrain, to today's reality, knowing that the reality is shoes, the reality is harder surfaces, concrete, things that don't vibrate and bring optimal sensory stimulation. Every shoe, even the most minimal shoes, still create a sensory barrier between the feet and the ground. And that's why if we use Naboso and we put them in the shoe, we can bring that additional stimulus to offset some of the disconnect that is created. Now, a lot of injuries that I see in my office, I actually attribute to delayed stabilization or delayed firing engagement of the core muscles of the foot or the intrinsics. So you see this loss of coordination or a misfiring of the muscles in our foundation. And if your foundation isn't firing at the right time, you go up to the next part of the body that's critical for standing and walking, and that's your core. And if your core isn't firing properly, you get low back pain, people get hip pain, SI joint pain, knee pain, back, or all of this. Foot pain is also connected to it. So everything kinematically and sensory wise is connected to the timing of that foot stabilization. Some of the conditions that you were saying, the toe walking, 100%. If we think of as we get older, we start to lose the sensitivity of our feet. There's some research that shows that the peak sensitivity in the nerves in your feet is age 40. And then by the time you're 70, you need twice as much information to create the same response in your feet or in your nervous system, in your muscles. So that would mean as we age, how do we keep optimal sensory stimulation? Oh, maybe Naboso. That's one of our markets. It's one of our markets. The other thing is that as we get older, we lose the fat in our feet. So it makes it hard for certain populations to go barefoot or to be totally minimal, which is what they might want to do, but maybe they have neuropathy, or maybe they have fat pad atrophy, or maybe they have thin skin, or we just get these age-related foot changes that we want to respect, but then still bring sensory into that environment. So those are other big ones that we work with. Anyone who's had a stroke, that's a great one. Parkinson's, MS, any of the neuropathies, chemoneuropathy, diabetic neuropathy, dystonia, concussions, any TBI, Ehlers-Danlos.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we have really good results with Ehlers-Danlos, which is interesting because it's a hypermobility disorder, which, if the listeners are not familiar with it, is think of being like super flexible, almost like a contortionist, that we might find that as like beneficial in some way. But if you exceed the range of motion, which you were kind of speaking about, sometimes we lose range of motion, hallux rigidus, but sometimes you have crazy amounts of range of motion that you can't control. That's also damaging to the joints that we need to somehow keep optimal mobility with those individuals. And we use Naboso for that as well.
I wanted to ask you if any research has been done, because, we have a saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So again, when we're getting into atrophy and age and that kind of thing, I'm wondering how much of it is disuse and how much is it of age? And is there any research that you've done or that you found where you're able to actually improve the sensory function with using the Naboso?
Yes, so there's a couple studies that looked at, you start with decreased sensitivity, say that you have, neurological condition, maybe low-grade neuropathy for various reasons, and then they showed chronic use of insoles, textured insoles. Again, we're replicating that right now with a pilot, but based off of prior research that showed using textured insoles for a period of, I believe it was either 7 to 10 days. So it was actually a short dose, but it was every day. They showed an increase in foot sensitivity by a Weinstein. So if the listeners are not familiar, it's like, think fishing wire and you're testing the sensitivity of the foot, that they showed increased sensitivity, and then they stopped the insoles, and 2 weeks later, they still showed that same sensitivity, which was great.
Now, so there was good carryover.
Yes, a carryover effect. How long was that carryover? You need to do more research, right?
Sure.
Now, one of the studies that we're doing with a Parkinson's population is looking at a Parkinson's population and then diabetic neuropathy, is if we use the insoles for 6 weeks, so it's longer, do we see a change in sensitivity? And then if we take the insoles away, same thing, how long does it last? But we're going to go 6 weeks out. So not a short condensed version, but a little bit longer. Really excited to see what the results of that are. And I will make sure that I share them with you so you can share them with your followers and patients.
Right. Yeah, it would be interesting. But, at the same time, I'm just like, well, why not just wear them all the time and have them in your shoes?
Yes.
And there are worse things, out there, with regard to that. Because it's not, again, like I said, people have to do worse things to maintain their health and their safety. One of the things that you were talking about, and I know when I was teaching my balance enhancement and fall prevention class, was that there was a very sharp decline in the sensory, it had to, and I read this so long ago, but it had to do with the myelinization of the nerve. And there seemed to be a very sharp decline between 79 and 80 even. Interesting, how that time frame just came up. So, again, is it just the fact that we don't use it and we lose it? And again, over time, because basically, we start wearing shoes as infants, unfortunately. I remember seeing like hiking boots on like a 6-month-old, and I'm like, oh no, it's like child abuse. Right. So, guys, keep your kids barefoot as much as possible. And if you live in colder climates, just keep them warm. But inside, for sure, try to keep the kids barefoot with regard to development and walking, and then even these things like the obstacle courses and things that mimic climbing trees and doing these things. And I wonder if as we're developing as society and we're not outside and we think it's dangerous to climb trees and you're freaking out about that kind of stuff. As that becomes, less acceptable from generations that stop doing these things, as we're looking, I am now evaluating kids in their 20s and 30s, and I have a better body than they do functionally. So, I think anything that we can develop to try to help and then obviously, be as active as possible, is really gonna help us. And if,
There was something really interesting that when you spoke about climbing trees and things like that, is there's actually this population, I think it's in Southeast Asia or something like that, maybe South America, that they still climb trees. Like they're indigenous, right?
Yes.
And they still climb trees. Their ankle dorsiflexion is so crazy. So they can actually climb a tree with their foot flat and they're dorsiflexing to like
that's
an
amazing
extreme angle. And they've had studies done on this population showing that the elasticity or the rubber band effect of their Achilles tendon is so much greater than most other populations, right? Or you think of even like people who are out of Africa, so African from a heritage perspective or like rooted from Africa, they have different lengths of their Achilles tendon and these characteristics that we want to try to keep. So there are genetic changes that do happen evolutionarily as we stop doing these things, that we want to make sure we try to stay to those natural roots of, you know, running free in the Sahara. Like they still have that genetically within their DNA, right? So they have more elasticity. Us in the Western population, how do we optimize and maintain our characteristics so that we can still do these different things, so we can still move functionally generations forward?
Right. And it's a bit like Tarzan. I wonder if you take like a child that's born in the United States to parents that were raised in the United States and brought them to Africa, what would happen? Like that would just, to me, again, I'm kind of fascinated by all of this, and I know you are as well. And, you know, I really appreciate your dedication in coming up with this, because I do believe that it's going to help a lot of people. If I haven't said this already, my dad uses the inserts. My colleague's dad uses the inserts. And again, if you have a senior population, it is a factor, you know, in falling. Because one of the first thing I said in my falls class to the physical therapist that I was teaching is that we fall when our center of gravity moves beyond our base of support. And that's actually how I got so passionate about the foot, because, you know, not many people fall in sitting. So the foot has to have something to do with it here, guys. It's our base of support. And so, you know, if we can't control our base of support, which again we're showing natural declines over age, and again, whether it's disuse or not, for the average person, it's going to happen unless you do something about it. And Naboso is and I'm mispronouncing it, aren't I? One of the things that you can do that's pretty simple, and you know, you're wearing shoes anyway. So why don't we talk about costs and, you know, that kind of thing. How much are the insoles?
Yep. So they are $50 for the pair, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's $50. You can buy them online on our website, which I'm going to show the logo just so people can see how it's spelled. So Naboso, Naboso Technology.com. We also sell them through various retailers and resellers. So we have various online resellers. They're sold on Amazon. They're sold on Walmart.com, our website, you know, various locations. They do have a 1-year guarantee on them. They can be easily washed. You just throw the entire thing in your washer and dryer, or you can throw it in a sink, wash it down. It won't ruin it. Air dry it or throw it in the dryer. We recommend doing that every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on how much you sweat. There is the texture. So obviously you want to have thin socks. You could be barefoot. A lot of our users are barefoot, but if you don't like being barefoot, you could wear thin socks and you'll still feel the texture under it. You would then, there's 4 sizes. When you get them, you would cut them to fit your shoe. Just trace your existing shoe liner and then cut them, put them in your shoe. It could go on top of the sock liner, on top of the orthotic or any insole that you have. And then we do suggest more is better. You could do a 30-minute break-in period, see how you feel, and if you feel fine, no problem. We do have a lot of users that are neuropathic or have neuropathy with no complications because of the recommendation of the sock. So you don't have to think about there's going to be skin breakdown. I know that's a big concern with neuropathy. But we have not had that as far as any reported skin breakdown. They're latex-free, petroleum-free, so if someone does go barefoot on them, we don't have to worry about any allergic reaction to them. And I think that is most of the information. We're on social media, so we do promotions all the time and kind of updates. We have a newsletter where we do a lot of information and education. So we do encourage people to follow us and then reach out if they have questions.
Excellent. All right, so we'll have all that information for people to reach out to you in the information box below. So we'll be sure to include that. And I think I am good. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we kind of wrap it up?
No, I think that this is great. I absolutely love that you, as a biomechanist, love to still appreciate the sensory side, which is amazing and very inspiring to see how you can combine them. I mean, both aspects of foot function and human function is appreciating both. And then how can we layer them or integrate them or find the synergy between them to get the most effective outcomes for our patients or for ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, when you said that, I remember my mentor always saying that every patient is every orthopedic patient is a neurological patient, and every neurological patient is an orthopedic patient. And both are really important. So, again, I respect and appreciate the components that you bring and, look forward to integrating it and sharing it with my population, which is really focusing on alignment. So between the two, hopefully we're going to make the world a safer, pain-free or less pain society because, grumpy people are not happy people. All right. Thank you, Dr. Emily, and I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll chat again soon, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Step Up with DL Walker. For any information about our guest, it'll be found in the comments box below this video. For more information on how you can recover from injury, restore vitality, and gain resilience from disease and trauma, all in the comfort of your home, click the link on the screen. Until next time, take good care of your body, mind, and spirit. It's the only true home that you really have.